Now we can start.
Now you can start, yes.
Come on into the circle. We want you in the circle of life here. So let's start by giving a brief introduction of ourselves. And I'm Roy Moran. I'm with an organization called New Generations. I am the author of this book, Spent Matches. If you're interested in what we're talking about today, you can look at that or a number of other resources that I will mention. And I live and work out of Kansas City, Missouri. So I'm not from the... I'm sorry. So I'd just like to say Patrick Mahomes. That's all I like to say. So, trumps anything that any Arizona Cardinal can say. So I'm with New Generations. I also work out of a church called Shoal Creek in Kansas City, the northeast side, a suburb called Liberty. So I have one wife, and that's a joke when you're in a Muslim community. So I have 4 children, 4 grown and married children, and 9 grandchildren. So I'm also the chairman of the board of New Generations, which is an organization that's connected with the team that the book Miraculous Movements is written about. And I also work as the North American Regional Director for New Generations at the moment. So, all right, that's a mouthful. Let's start on my right, Brooklyn.
I'm Brooklyn. I am from here, from East Mesa. I'm at Red Mountain Community Church, and I oversee our high school group. Recently. Some children's for 5 years, and then took on bigger children.
Oh, wow. Yeah, we'll pray for you.
Thank you.
Richard? I'm Richard Jackman. I'm with the Mosaic Church of the Nazarene down in Florence. I just recently, in June, retired after 2 years as a correctional chaplain. And am now on staff as the Director of Discipleship. Married. 50 years.
Cool.
Only one at 50?
Well, over the years there's been more, but there's currently one.
I'm Marcel. I live in Scottsdale currently. Been here about a year, and I am kind of like a stateside type of missionary.
All right.
I'm Dennis McMains, and I live here in the East Valley. And I work with Converge, and I am the international leader for all of the things that we do in Europe and the Middle East.
Okay.
I also work for one of our local churches here in Rock Point, and I work as their global development and care pastor when I'm not traveling.
We probably have some common friends.
My name is Alyssa, and I'm here representing Phoenix Underground.
My name is Mulenga. I'm from Zambia in Africa, and I lead a church there, and I'm with Dennis and Converge.
Okay. All right. Let's see.
I'm Tara. I'm Stephen. I do operations for New Generations, and I take care of 3 crazy children under 5 most of the time.
So the babysitter must not be sick.
Finally, we're done. We're done. Instead of down with the sick, we're done with the sickness.
Okay, good.
They have pinch hitter sticker.
Ah, nice. Okay, all right. Stephen?
Yeah, so in addition to what Tara said, we're part of the Phoenix Underground and working to get this cycle started.
Okay. All right.
Graham, and this is my son Stephen, and I am with Phoenix Underground. Yeah, just excited to be here and
Okay.
Joey and Brooke, and we're just humbled to be in this class and can't wait to see what we have to learn.
All right.
I'm Dick Ulmer. Historically, I worked with Mike Crossman for 12 years or something like that. This is my daughter and son-in-law. Thanks to them, I have 7 grandchildren, 3 great-grandchildren.
Wow.
And I'm Matt Swartz. I'm the Director of Global Pastor Training for Developing Workers, and also work with Dennis McMains part-time in Global Outreach for Rock Point Church. And what's that?
My condolences.
Yeah.
Wow.
Condolences.
Oh, man, it's...
And 3 adult kids that are all serving Jesus. So I'm content.
Cool.
I'm Brian. I have 3 daughters also. I'm very excited they're all following Jesus. That's the number one thing. I'm with an organization called Novo. I was in Berlin the last 8 years, just landed here a couple months ago. And also connecting with the Phoenix Underground and really, really great folks. So.
Cool. All right. So I'd like you to divide in groups of 4. I don't know if that's... I haven't counted the room yet, so we may have a group of 3 or a group of 4. I would like you to do 2 things in that group of 4. Tell everyone, you just told them, so what's your primary identity when you think of this concept of disciple-making movements? Are you a leader in an institution attempting to influence that institution? Are you just a follower in that institution attempting to be a practitioner? So identify yourself in terms of that. And then I'd like you to, as a group, come up with a definition of what you would think as disciple-making movements. All right? So you're here in this course about building a disciple-making culture. Several of you have used the term disciple-making movement. So I would just like to see where we are in terms of our commonality of definitions, because it's really important, when you use terms, to be able to make sure that message sent is actually message received. And so when I say a winning football team, I mean Kansas City, not the... Just kidding. I'll shut that down now. I'll get in a fight here in a minute. So just take a moment. I'm going to give you 5 minutes to do all that, so not long, but just to kind of get a brief sense of where we are in the room. All right. So groups of 4. Go ahead and move your chairs around.
Resource
Got it up?
Disciple making movements.
2 years ago, that probably a year and a half or so.
What was our assignment besides singing?
Definition. Definition. Yeah. Go ahead and join a group. They'll clue you in.
So I'm a bystander at this point, but I've certainly read about this. Approaches, most of them
Are you related to teachers?
no special effects. Want them to be able to.
I'm from
Rockport. It started.
All right, 2 minutes left. Talk to me. Talk to them.
You're part of that? Secondly, it says almost nothing to do with performing.
Supplementary movements.
Well,
He's already called it.
yeah, the church will have.
That makes sense. That's church planning.
All right, 30 seconds. Finish up. right, time's up.
Right.
So let's do one more thing here. I'm going to count to 3. 1, 2, 3. And when I count to 3, I want you to point to the person that's going to speak for your group. All right? So I'm going to count to 3. 1, 2, 3. Point. All right, who has the most fingers pointing at them? Stephen. Okay. All right, we'll start there. So, go ahead, Stephen. Tell us what a disciple-making movement is.
It's a movement that makes disciples, which are people who actually put into practice what God has told us in the Scriptures. But not only that, continue to multiply throughout the spiritual generations, which make disciples, but don't just stop there, but continue to reproduce and keep on going.
Okay. All right. Can you guys improve on that?
Can't improve, no. Just add that it's generally the quality of a disciple-making movement is that it looks like it's fast, but the reality is it usually starts very slow. That as it matures because of multiplication, when we finally look at it, we say, wow, that's incredible, because it looks like it's just blowing up, but it's usually because it's been a lot of years of prayer and it started slow. And we would say, too, that to really be a disciple-making movement, there's probably going to have been at least 4 generations of church planting.
Okay. All right.
That's what we would add as well. We wouldn't improve. We're just going to keep adding. You've got to have a how many. You got to count.
Mm-hmm.
And that would describe a movement where it's constantly moving and reproducing.
Okay, excellent. So just so I could throw some terms around here so we understand if they get thrown up. David Garrison's book, Church Planting Movements, that came out in the 90s, was describing, came out in 2000s, describing some of the things that were happening amongst the IMB missionaries. And they were seeing this rapid increase of church plants, where churches plant churches, plant churches, plant churches. It was out of that idea of 4 generations of churches planting churches, over 100 churches in a short period of time. That kind of definition began to float around. Later on, some people have tried to add streams into it, so 4 generations of churches out of multiple streams over a short period of time, totaling over 100 churches. In the about mid-2000s, the New Generations team decided that they wanted to depart from CPM and start using the term DMM, Disciple Making Movement, simply because there were 2 families of tactics that were developing inside the movement world. And one of those families of tactics, we could put T for T, NPL, Big Life, all very traditional Navigators Crusade, Crew, InterVarsity, all that kind of stuff. Started over here with evangelism and an individual, whereas over here they were starting with actually reading the Bible with non-believers and using a process of discovery and identifying persons of peace inside social networks. So they were focused on individuals. These guys were focusing on groups. And so these 2 different tactics arose up. Both of them have been responsible for what we would call movements in that sense. But the New Generations team sits over here in this area. So as we go further on tonight, this is going to kind of be the arena that which I'm leaning out of. All right. So any questions or further comments? Yes, sir.
One of the things that wasn't mentioned is, say on the right side there, if you have a discovery group, it's usually, if it's going to turn into a movement, it's going to have to be fit the culture it's in. Mm-hmm. There's no external person driving it.
Okay.
It might have helped light the fire.
Okay. So inside leaders would be a critical thing over here. And one of the phrases that would come out of that we would say that untrained inside leaders are always more effective than trained outside leaders. So anytime you have a question, a comment, criticism.
Do you see established denominations fitting on either side of those more than the other?
I don't know any denomination that's over here.
It doesn't surprise me.
Yeah. I mean, all of us probably started on this side at some point. I mean, that's... I came to faith through the influence of a local church and what was then called Campus Crusade for Christ. This tends to be, where most of modern Christianity, is located. All right. So I ask you a question. Any other thoughts, comments here? Yes, sir.
Roy, you always talk about DBS being, or DMM being, draw them in and they discover. But, man, as I've been watching some of these movements, it seems an awful lot of the people are doing evangelism in DMM as well. Mm-hmm. Starting right out with sharing a very truncated gospel, and then so help me. Are we really seeing most of these groups happen by people being first invited into discovery groups, or is that the talk and in reality it's not happening?
Okay, so I'll tell you what I know. Over here, we're talking, I'm talking from a new generation standpoint. We have 164 of these 1,800, almost 1,900 movements that are recorded by 2414. So I'm only talking about less than 10% of them. All right? So there's no doubt that people identifying themselves spiritually can look different. It can look like a gospel presentation, or it can look like just simply compassionate love, taking water or health or education or some type of poverty that's being met in a community, and then the question comes, why are you doing this? Because God called us to love you. Jesus loved the world, and that starts a conversation, and you identify a person of peace, and that person of peace then becomes the beginning of a discovery group in their home, and that works out. The large majority of these have grown out of that. I can't really speak to that up here. There are cultures that a sort of a persuasional presentation of the gospel is not offensive.
What I'm getting is, like, take Sheikh Hanif in the opening chapter of Miraculous Movements. He didn't come to Christ through a DBS. Mm-hmm. One of the guys went to him, met him, shared the gospel with him. The whole family believed, and then they started it. Mm-hmm. That seems to be surprisingly normal. So I'm just not sure. Are we really doing this? I hope we are. But so much of my experience in visiting these movements has been that it's really not that different. There's a presentation of some cross-centered story, Good Friday story, and then calling for, oftentimes miracles too.
Yeah. But for the first people to get it rolling is what you're talking about, or even the whole thing.
There's a movement I'm working with in India. They regularly go out and baptize right away. Mm-hmm. And it's a DMM movement. Mm-hmm. I'm thinking, okay, is this really happening where people are just slowly brought in these DBSs? I know I'm sounding like a heretic here.
Yeah. I mean, I can tell you it is. I mean, if you get like for instance, you mentioned the sheikh there, Hassan, who is a friend. What they do in West Africa is go in and plant a school in a village, in a Muslim village, and as they they raise the money to build that school. They get the government to fund the teaching staff under the auspices of the paramount chief, the sheikh, whoever the religious leader is there, because what's happening in the Muslim education is that there's no business skills. There's no reading and writing skills. It's all about the Quran and stuff. And so kids are growing up and they can't fit in. They can't earn a living and stuff. And so through that process, they identify a person of peace. It's a very slow process, and they begin the process of reading the Bible. So if you visit there today, typically the person who was the first person of peace is still identifiable. They'll go and say, this was the first person of peace. And so it is happening, but this is happening as well. They're like in India, for instance. There's a lot of things happen in India, really crazy. I mean, a lot of things. It's so. Any other thoughts here before we move on? So it's really critical here. Most of this is east coming to west. All right, so happening in the east, coming to the west. And so I ask you a question about where are you in the ministry? Are you a follower, a volunteer, that kind of stuff in something, or are you a leader in something? And that's real critical to understand. At what point are you going to attempt to influence, or how are you going to experience a disciple-making movement? You can learn, Stephen.
And I'm just going to, just because I think some people, I'm going to ask you to make a brief aside and just tell a little bit of like the verified numbers of what you've seen with new generations. Why are people talking about this right now? And what has happened in the last 2 decades that makes this significant that people in the States would even care about learning about this?
Yeah. Well, I mean, from us, we're only a small part of this, but we've just creeped over 2 million disciples in 90,000 churches.
And is that in places where it's really popular to follow Jesus?
Now, probably about 600,000 of those are Muslims. So, a little over 25% of those are Muslims. So following Jesus is usually life-threatening in many ways. But at the same level, we're seeing lots of people follow Jesus at the same time in a certain area. Not long ago in Northeast Africa, there was a martyr situation where a group of militant Muslims came and killed couple of our leaders, and it was just a gruesome machete-type death, and so it wasn't long after that militant Muslim area experienced a flood and wiped out about 600 homes and just devastated that area. And so there was a sense in some of the Christians that it was God's judgment, but one of our leaders felt like we needed to have compassion on these countrymen. So he took a bunch of money over there to the sheikh and gave it to him and said, look, we're here to help you rebuild these homes. And the sheikh was stunned. He said, do you know who we are? And he said, yeah, we know who we are. He says, do you know what we did? And he says, yeah, I know what you did. We do. But we're here because Jesus has taught us to forgive our enemies and to love them in ways that most humans don't experience. And so that began the process of Discovery Bible studies in that village, even that day. And they were baptizing that week people coming to faith as a result of this expression of love. And that's happened, not that particular situation, but many times through something not so tragic, whereas providing education or water or health for people to be able to get a basis or establish ourselves in a community to be able to then invite people into that. So we have we do a lot of evaluation. We spend a lot of time on spreadsheets and collecting data and that kind of stuff. As you know, I'm not telling you anything you don't know. So we track not only churches that birth, but we track churches that die. So when we say 90,000 churches, we planted a lot more than that. But we also track the ones that don't make it as well. Does that help? Okay. So I think one of the, to get to the topic here, let's talk about this. In 2000, in the middle 2000s, 2007, 2008, was traveling the world to try to figure out where I could find a model that was of the gospel that was scalable. It's the only word I had coming out of Silicon Valley. What could scale? How could the gospel scale? Because all I saw was church planting that was one by one by one by one, or sort of the franchise approach where you would take and build campuses. So you have these satellite campuses and do a multi-site thing, but it still wasn't making a dent in the percentage of people who were coming to faith. We were still losing ground on that. And so I just wondered in myself, is like a soul-stirring type thing, is where is there a scalable model of ministry? So I ran across these guys. I had a chance to be adopted by them, even though I'm older than all of them. They became my father in the ministry, and I became their son. They would laugh if they were here, me saying that, but they really helped me read the Bible in a new and different way. And so I came back to a local church in the U.S., attempting to see what I could do to make something happen. And I learned a lot of lessons in the next 5 years. And so I'd like to take a few minutes here just to tell you the lessons I learned about building a disciple-making culture. The first lesson I learned is you can't do it from the front. Like many Western church leaders, I was intoxicated on my ability to influence people. And I thought if I went over a cliff, everyone would go over a cliff with me, and we would just, charge the gates of hell with a water pistol. And I discovered that, about 12% of them will go over the cliff with you. The other 88% will stand at the edge of the cliff and pray for you. It's just, you cannot build a disciple-making culture by trying to change a church or an institution or anything from the front. It has to be done from the back. It has to be done not in a large way, but in a small way. And the reason that is because what you're doing is not a training issue. Second mistake I made. I thought it was a training issue. I thought people had not learned to gospel correctly. So they taught me what it was like to sit, non-believers down in a circle and to help them learn to read the Bible on a weekly basis, learn to obey it, identify to one another. If this is God speaking, this is what I'm going to do. Become accountable to one another, and also to share what God was doing in our lives with our friends. I thought it was just a training problem. And so I made the classic mistake, which is I see all the time. People say, that DBS, you heard that term mentioned, Discovery Bible Study, equals DMM. And it doesn't. And we could spend some time talking about that, but I'm going to move on. What I discovered is it wasn't a training problem, but it was a culture problem. I was building a brand new culture because every American, Western, legacy church that's been around for any time has a set of cultural values in it that are embedded deep. So if we think about culture here, you're from Zambia, right? If the language in Zambia, I think, is English, isn't it?
Yes.
It is. Yes.
Official language.
Official language. I bet you speak a tribal language of some sort. What?
Bemba.
Bemba. Bemba. Okay. So if I get dropped into the Bemba people, and obviously, they're going to see me, and right away they know I don't belong there. Well, do you know my last name? My last name? Okay. This is, for those of you who have traveled, my last name, how would you say that? Moran. How would you say that? Moran. And if do you know what it means in Maasai?
No.
It means warrior. So in Maasai, when you go out and kill a lion with your spear, you become a Moran. So I am actually the only white Maasai you know. So when in East Africa, especially when they hear my last name pronounced, I don't know how many times I've been asked by Africans, "Are you Maasai?" It's like, do I look Maasai? Let me jump for you and see. Put my shuka on and stuff. So anyway, culture is about language, and in the legacy church that we've all grown up in, the language is mostly about addition. We go after individuals. We attempt to persuade them to change their beliefs about Jesus, and we do it one at a time. And in movements, it's really about groups, getting the gospel into groups and leveraging social networks and watching it move through those social networks. And so there's a different way of thinking in that. So there's language that has to be expressed that bears the new cultural values. There's also there's ritual. If I come to the Bemba tribe, I'm sure there are things that I should know. Like, for instance, should I approach a female and shove my hand out to her and say, "Hey, how are you doing? I'm Roy. Glad to meet you." That probably is inappropriate, I would bet. In that code. So there are rituals that have to take place. Whereas typically, for us in our settings, we have this ritual of coming to a building on Sunday. And that is going to church. Yeah. Now we all know that's theologically wrong. We all know that's an abuse of the biblical language and the concept of ecclesia. But I would guarantee you that every one of you have probably made that mistake, in the past week. And you continue to make that mistake, But when we move into this world of movement, we have a different language that we begin to talk about and understand ecclesia in a different way. It doesn't meet in a home. It doesn't meet in a building. It typically meets where people live. It meets sometimes outside, under a tree. And when we think of having church, it's not like we have church. Yes, sir.
Say if it's going to go anywhere, it has to look. What's the word?
Simple.
Indigenous.
Yeah. Yeah, so the first mistake I made was basically thinking of it, as I was moving into this idea of building a disciple-making culture. I had to understand what was happening. And I couldn't do it with the influence of my leadership. Because in a movement world, I discovered that there's a different style of leadership. It's catalytic. I thought, it's hard to, I don't know how many of you are church leaders here, but, those of us who are church leaders, we really get intoxicated on, and you're probably going, "I'm not intoxicated. I don't, I'm not talking about alcohol here. I'm talking about influence and so. We just don't, what we don't see, a fish doesn't feel wet, does it? That's just normal. And so we don't see the fact that we cannot influence people into that. But catalytic is about being able to, of knowing that it does start with you, but it can't depend on you. And so, a third point I discovered is not only could I not do it from the front, not only was it not a training, but it was a culture issue, was I was not a catalytic leader. I was built to create dependency. I have a theological education. I have a bachelor's degree in Greek. I love to give people answers about the Bible and theology and explain it in such ways that impresses me. But I'm not that concerned. I mean, I thought I was. I thought I was. But I thought the way I explained things was really going to help them. And what I did is sometimes I helped them grow, but I didn't help them multiply. And so I was creating seedless grapes. They were bearing fruit, but they couldn't bear fruit. And learning to be a catalytic leader was learning to realize that not only to get generational growth, you not only have to pass along the truth, but you have to pass along the process as well. So when I discovered, now, I made a lot of disciples. This is not like I was some kind of stooge out there. I made a lot of disciples. But all my disciples were not making disciples, because the methodologies I was using was not repeatable. So, in these movements, one of the other presumptions, and I had this presumption, but I didn't know how to work with it, is that God uses ordinary people to do extraordinary things. And so, my methodologies were not built for ordinary people. If you were like me, if you had a theological education, if you like to read books, if you like to talk about really hard stuff, and you like to be really in your face about things, then you could be like me. You could make a disciple. But most of the people I was working with weren't like me. And so I had to come to the realizes that my methodologies had to change. And so they had to be simple enough, to be repeatable enough, to be sustainable enough to get to multiplication. And so that was one of the things that really caused me to move into this whole discovery, because now I've seen it with people. I've seen non-believers reading the Bible for themselves, being asked to be obedient to it, sharing it with their friends and families and workmates. I've seen them walk themselves into the family of God. And in doing so, be able to turn around and do it with someone else without me. And that's the key to the whole movement, is becoming a catalytic leader. All right. I'm going to stop there. Give us 10 minutes for Q&A. So, questions, thoughts, just want to take us someplace totally different. Yes, sir.
Yes, just want to agree with your thoughts and discoveries. Many a time, the average American Christian who reads, thinks deeply, cannot easily make disciples in other cultures, because other cultures are not as blessed with education, knowledge, etc., etc. So there's a gap that always comes in, and it's difficult to multiply what we receive from our disciples.
Yeah. Oftentimes, one of the assumptions that I made when I was committed to ministry as opposed to movement was growth. And I thought if I came to Zambia and I sat with, people in your church or other leaders, other pastors like you, if I gave you information, if I expanded your head, your horizons in a sense, it caused you to grow intellectually, that you would grow spiritually. And that's not always the case. And the beauty of what Discovery taught me is that instead of going to a feast and eating, small morsels of truth acted upon. Now we know this in our physical body, is that if we take in more calories than the energy that it takes to our bodies to live, what happens to us? We do. We get fatter, don't we? And is that healthy? No, it's not. But we do that all the time spiritually. We every week, we go to the feast, and the head chef stands up and delivers the feast, and we leave. And I don't know how many. Maybe your church is different, but I don't know. I've never been to a church that I came back the next week and someone met me at the door or sit next to me, or there was some part of the service that stopped and people said, "What did you do with the truth you learned last week? How did you apply it?" That's not usually the case. We're more interested in growth than we are multiplication. And multiplication takes small bits of truth. You do need information, small bits of truth, but it has to be acted upon. If it's not acted upon, then it's not really in the vein of what Jesus called us to do. Jesus says, if you love me, do what I say. Not know what I say. Yes, sir.
Very fascinating. I would love to hear what you're talking about is just so huge. I would love to hear your philosophy on fasting. What part must that play in doing something so amazing?
Well, usually what happens is in the movements that we have, and I'm sure it's true up here too, but one of the things that you are taken with immediately when you enter into them is prayer and fasting. You see a seriousness about lostness that is sometimes overwhelming. You feel a sense of shame quickly because you see people who have much less than you, who know tons less than you, about the Bible and stuff, but obey tons more than you, about the Bible. So they tend to, they go to their Father because they know they're in a battle that's not against flesh and blood, and they use disciplines of abstinence, like fasting, to sensitize them to the spiritual world. And they do it a lot. So most of our movements would at least have every week, one day a week, they all fast together. So it's like they just, and then the first 21 days of the year, many of them will go on a Daniel fast, and they'll fast for the first 21 days of the year. And then they'll have these first 3 days of the month fast. Now you start adding all this up and it gets a little bit like, I'm thinking, hey, these people are insane, But they do understand, especially in their world, they see the forces of darkness in front of them. And so they understand it's not a battle against flesh and blood, that if I'm not in a posture of dependence to my Father and I'm not pursuing His heart in my world, then I don't have a chance of winning this battle. And so they lean heavy into that as if it were a physical battle. I mean, you feel like, sometimes it's loud, sometimes it's physical, it's the kind of stuff. But yet, they do believe that it's a spiritual battle. Stephen.
What were some of the biggest changes just in the practical actions you took, maybe on your own or also with the people you were working with? What you were doing before versus what you were doing now?
I have a tendency to initiate. So if you said something slightly incorrect biblically, I would find a way to quickly correct you. What I would think would be appropriate, what I would think would be more mature, but you probably wouldn't think that. I just had this correctness about me, and so it caused me just to learn a different posture with people, to be curious. start asking questions about people's lives and journey, and to find out about them, rather than pushing to find a space to get into a spiritual conversation with them. I was always trying to find a platform in the conversation to have a spiritual moment where I could let them know what I knew and I thought they didn't know about Jesus and how they need to change their mind. As opposed to being genuinely interested in people, believing that it's another human being, a soul that Jesus died for. I'd like to hear their story. And I'd like them to feel like I love them, rather than that I'm coming with some kind of pressure about what they believe or don't believe. And being in a role in the staff of a church and known in the community for that, it was an extra added disadvantage to me, in that sense. I started just letting people read the Bible rather than teaching it. And I started asking more questions than I did give answers. I became less enamored with my words and more interested in getting more words out of people. I think in terms of what we did, in a church environment is at first we trained a lot, and it wasn't until we got this concept of everything starts out of the Father's heart that we really got things right, and so. It developed out of sort of the new generation's environment, but we developed this paradigm we call the habits now. Can't spell. So we began to help people understand that there was a flywheel of movement that had to get started and had to be turned and turned and turned and turned, and we needed to be patient. When I learned the true history of the movement in sub-Saharan Africa, that it didn't measure anything really significant of growth for about 5 or 6 years, and I realized that...
Here's what I found.
Thank you, Siri. Africa's rapid growth. So I realized that this takes a lot of work. It's not a flash in the pan. It's not a new technique. It's not a recipe. It's not something that you just go and do and it happens. It's like this was like a lot of really hard work. Praying, engaging lost people, finding persons of peace, inviting them into discovery, letting them assemble into local fellowships, and then building a culture of multiplication, and just keep turning that wheel around and around and around. I realized is it took, for especially Americans, it took a lot of deconstruction. I like to be liked. I mean, I like people to like me. I know sometimes those of you who know me think, wow, I don't think you do like people to like you, If you did, you wouldn't say the things you say, But I like to be liked. But I discovered that I had to be in the business of deconstruction all the time. And that meant politely challenging people's presumptions. So my children, for instance... My children, growing up, they could not say, we're going to church. They would get the wrath of God coming down their head if I ever heard them say, going to church. I mean, it's just, I'm trying to get my kids to think biblically, And so they call the campus at Shoal Creek the Hog. And they would say, we're going to the Hog, the house of God. And that was their little code word for getting around Dad, and that kind of stuff. But I mean, you got to be in a deconstruction mode. You got to regularly help people experience their thinking and understand their wetness. And that was hard for me. That was hard for me to realize that I was going to have to help them change their paradigms all the time. And that meant being a bit irritating to people. Instead of trying to befriend people and get them to love me and that kind of stuff. That changed. So, yes, sir.
So you had mentioned you can't do it from the front, you got to do it from the back. As a senior pastor, when you were coaching me, or another senior pastor, where do you start?
I think you got to go looking for the radicals. You got to find those people who are wholly discontent. And they're there. I believe that just like when Elijah's running for Mount Carmel and he thinks he's the only one, we oftentimes, we read a book and we see this and we think, oh God, I'm the only one in this church. No one else, really, wants to see the viral gospel move and that kind of stuff. But I think there are people out there. So you got to start planting the kind of seeds or raising a flag that lets these radicals know that there's a space to come and do this. And so, that can be done by the general stuff, announcements and emails and, your website and your social media and all that kind of stuff. But you need to offer an opportunity for people to come to a space where they can identify their radicalness. Now, for me, it would be, practically we would offer the habits course, on a regular basis to people, just to say, hey, if you want to learn how to plant the gospel in a way that it goes viral in your neighborhood or your workplace, come join us over here. And I would look for those radicals, and every story I get, it's gold. And so we'll tell those stories from the front quite frequently to be able to get those radicals to join us, in the back. I don't know if that's just a little bit. I mean, there's my email up here. If you guys want to email me, we can talk. Roy R. Moran at newgenerations.org. Was that a hand raised? Or?
Radicals you're talking about, are they usually suppressed in most churches?
I wouldn't call it suppressed, but under challenged. It's like, it's someone who has imagine yourself in the business world where you're thinking about big ideas and scaling and you're thinking about stuff, and in the spiritual world, you're handing out bulletins or working in the nursery or on the guest relations of the parking team and stuff, and all that's okay and that's good and stuff. But there may be people whose aspirations of this thing could be so much better. We should be doing so much more. We should be having a bigger impact, better influence. We should be, charging hell with a water pistol here, and we're just putzing around every Sunday, just turning the smoke machines on and letting electric guitars fly and think we're doing something. So it's when people. I'm a senior pastor myself, so when people hear me talk like that, and I don't talk like that from the front, but when in private and in smaller groups they hear me talk like that, that's when the radicals come out. They go, whoa, can we talk? But David?
Roy, do you see the
role?
We got to go. The role of the pastor sometimes hindering this whole process of disciple making, and I wonder if you could talk a little bit about just ordinary people.
Yeah, I mean, this is all about ordinary people, so it's about creating methodologies that move. So we have a situation in which, in the American landscape, we have this one guy or group of guys and gals now who are really artists. They're like the Picassos and all that kind of stuff, and there's only one of them. It's one of the reasons why we shifted to multi-site in the Western world, because we can only find one really good communicator, and so we multiply his voice, 50 times across a city or whatever, across a nation, that kind of stuff. So the problem is that our methodologies are not created for art, or at least the movements are not created for artists. They need to be created, for really craftsmen. Like craftsmen pass things down from generation to generation, and it's like from son to father, or daughter to mother to daughter, that kind of stuff. They pass these kinds of skills down from generation to generation, and we just have kind of an artist mentality, and it's up front, and I know none of these places are, the places you're at, but, there's kind of a hero worship mentality, and no one can be as eloquent or whatever as that person up there. And that whole one-to-many type thing is difficult because the medium is the message. You can stand on that stage and say, I believe in the priesthood of the believer. Every believer, grounded at the foot of the cross is level. Everyone, every member of ministry, minister, you can say all that kind of stuff. But you're the only one talking to, 500 people. And it's like, what does it say? I mean, the method is the message here. People don't hear that. They think, oh yeah, you can do that, but not me. Because most of us, if we're up front, we're seen as unicorns. Not that we are, by any stretch of the imagination. But if you stand on that platform, you're seen as a unicorn by the average person. And their basic, fundamental belief is, I can't do what you do. And as long as we have that fundamental belief, then the gospel's never going to move, through ordinary people. So, hey, it's time to go. We got to get over there to that so let me pray for us. And then we'll let you go. And if you want to stay behind and talk, we can. Father, thanks so much for these folks. Thanks for this time. We would pray that it is an investment of your kingdom. We can stand around here and talk all night long. But until our lives lean into lostness, until we become responsible for lostness someplace, and we build relationships with people who are hellbound, and we are broken in our hearts like you're broken in your hearts, until we learn to live on the edge of the city waiting for our son to come home, we will find ourselves struggling just in the realm of talk. And so we just ask that you would break our hearts for the lostness of this world, for the fact that every 2 minutes, someone dies without ever hearing the name of Jesus. We have more money, we have more technology than we've ever had, and yet we're seeing more people go to hell than ever in the history of the church. And so, Father, I pray that through things like this conference and through the lives of these men and women, that we might see that change in this generation. Thank you for your son, Jesus. We pray in his name. Amen.